Hi everyone, this video is going to be about dimensional analysis. Nobody wants to have to say dimensional analysis or write it out every time, so you may see people abbreviate it as DA. Another term you might hear for it is unit conversion. I like that name because I think that name really emphasizes what we're doing. We're going to be converting from one unit to another. The technique of dimensional analysis uses conversion factors. A conversion factor is a relationship between one unit and the other. So for example, we have 1 inch is the same as 2.54 centimeters. You could write that the other way. 2.54 centimeters is the same as 1 inch. Or you could even write that as fractions. You could say 1 inch per 2.54 centimeters. Or you could flip that and you could say 2.54 centimeters per 1 inch. So one of the most important things to realize is that we can write them as fractions and that you can flip conversion factors. That's going to allow us to write them in the way that's going to be convenient for us. So this first problem says 19 inches to feet. So we're going from inches into feet. A lot of times people would just go, oh, I know how to do this, 19 divided by 12. Well, that'll give you the correct number. That's not really the correct way to show your work because it has nothing to do with the actual units. So this would be the wrong work to show. So instead we can write 19 inches and we're going to multiply that by the fact that 1 foot is the same as 12 inches. If I have 1 unit on the top and 1 unit on the bottom, they cancel. And that's a much better way to show our work. That's not really the format that I'm going to use though. So this is just kind of the wrong format. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use something called the line method. I like the line method because when we have a lot of complicated numbers, scientific notation, negative exponents, things like that, this line method is going to keep things nice and tidy and is going to make things a little bit more readable. So I'm still going to write 19 inches. I'm going to start with my known value. But instead of using multiplication symbols and parentheses and fractions, I'm just going to use a vertical bar instead of a multiplication symbol. And then my conversion factor is going to go here, just like a fraction, but we don't need to use all of the parentheses. I still have 1 unit on top and 1 unit on bottom canceling. That'll leave me with feet as my unit. I punch it in my calculator, 19 times 1, which is a little bit silly, divided by 12. We get 1.6 feet. I have my answer, I have units, and I put a box around my final answer. For this class, you must use the line method. One of the things we are assessing you on is not whether or not you can punch your calculator and just get the correct answer, but that you can adequately convey what you're doing with your units and do it in a way that is nice and clear and readable, and that's why we prefer the line method. So for the next problem, I'm going to go from inches to centimeters. I start with my known value, and then I'm going to think about the conversion factor I'm going to use. So I know that 1 inch is the same as 2.54 centimeters, but if I put inch on the top, it won't be able to cancel. So I'm going to use this version of my conversion factor so that inches is on the bottom. So 1 inch is the same as 2.54 centimeters. Now, 1 inch on top, 1 inch on bottom, leaves me with centimeters. I punch that into my calculator. 840 times 2.54 divided by 1 gives me 2,133.6 centimeters. I have my answer, I have units, and I have a box around it. So let's make a list of the things that you need in order to get full credit for showing your work. No work, no points. That's going to be true all year. So we should mark up the question. That's how I figured out, I underlined what I started with, I circled what I'm looking for. On a problem like this, that feels a little silly, but when it becomes a complicated word problem, that is much more helpful. We're going to learn to write what we call a pathway next. You need to have your conversion factors. You need your line set up. You need to show that your units cancel. And finally, you need your answer with units and a box. So on this next problem, let's write out our pathway. I'll show you how to do that next. We're going from inches to miles. And I don't know about you, but I don't have memorized one conversion factor that tells me how many inches are in a mile. I'm too lazy to memorize something like that. But I do know some baby steps. So my pathway is the equivalent of my baby steps. Just like a frog doesn't hop across the pond in one giant leap, it kind of leapfrogs from one lily pad to the next, to the next, to the next, until it finally gets across the pond. That's what we're going to do. I don't know how to go inches to miles, but I do know how to go inches to feet. And I do know how to go feet to miles. There's 12 inches in 1 foot. And there's 5,280 feet in 1 mile. So I'm going to use those conversion factors to help me do my baby steps. So I'm going to start with 5,400 inches. I want inches on the bottom, so 12 inches goes on the bottom. 1 foot goes on the top. If I stopped now, my inches would cancel, but I'd only be at feet. So in order to keep going, I'm just going to do another vertical bar, which is another multiplication symbol, and I'm going to put my next fraction on the right. Now I want feet to cancel, so I'm going to put 5,280 feet on the bottom. I'm going to put 1 mile on the top. My feet will cancel. I'll be left with miles. So 5,400 times 1 divided by everything on the bottom, 12 inches and 5,280 feet. We have a lot of problems with calculators and using parentheses correctly. From my experience doing this for years, the safest way is to put all the numbers on the top inside one set of parentheses. Then you hit divide in your calculator, and then you do all the numbers on the bottom in a new set of parentheses. With the calculators we use in class, that's the safest, the type that most people tend to have. If you have a funky calculator, you may need to do something different. So what this would look like is 5,400 times 1 I know in your calculator that's a little silly, but that is what we're doing. Everything on the top divided by everything on the bottom. So 12 inches and then the 5,280. Close your parentheses. If you do that correctly, you should end up with 0.085 miles. Answer, unit in a box. Alright, I'd like you to pause the video and try the next one on your own. When you unpause it, you'll see the worked out answer. Okay, hopefully you actually pressed pause and gave it a try. So this is the worked out answer. You can see that I marked up my question. I went from seconds to weeks. I have my pathway, my baby steps. I don't know how many seconds are in a week, but I do know how many seconds are in a minute. I know how many minutes are in an hour. I know how many hours are in a day, and I know how many days are in a week. Now, let's say for whatever reason you happen to know how many seconds were in an hour. That's totally fine. You don't have to go to minutes first. If you know a conversion factor that lets you do a bigger jump, that's totally fine. We may have different pathways compared to each other, but our final answer should end up the same. Maybe it's rounded a little different, but it should end up basically the same. You can see here that I went from seconds to minutes. I went from minutes to hours. I went from hours to days. I went from days to weeks when I was all done. Okay. Next, this one's a little different. This one is a word problem. We're going to do it exactly the same, but it may just be a little more involved trying to figure out what numbers to use. For word problems, I like to use a highlighter to highlight anything that might be a conversion factor, anything that relates two numbers to each other. So for this one, in my class, each student is given 3 pens. There are 8 pens in one package. It costs $1.88 per package, and I have 28 students in my class. That's my starting value. And what I'm solving for is the total cost, and cost is going to be in dollars. Sometimes finding the starting and ending values can be tricky. That might sometimes be the hardest part. My pathway is going to go students to pens, pens to packages, and packages to cost. I wish I had some trick to help you find the pathway, but that's just where kind of the problem solving and puzzle thinking and logic comes in. There's no trick that I have to help you with this part. That's kind of the hardest part, is being able to think about what your pathway might be. The more you practice, you'll notice there's really not a huge variation in pathways for the types of problems we'll have. So practice will help you find your pathways much faster. So 28 students. One student gets 3 pens. There are 8 pens in one package. And one package costs $1.88. Students cancels, pens cancel, package cancels, and I'm left with dollars. So 28 times 3 times 1 times 1.88, and I'm going to divide that by 1, divide it by 8, and divide it by 1 again. If I do that in my calculator correctly with my parentheses correct, I'll get that it's $19.74. I'd like you to pause the video and try the next one. Hope that's alright. Here's the finished one. You can see we had 2 conversion factors. I went from miles to gallons, gallons to cost, and I got $25. I made sure all of my units canceled, one on top and one on the bottom. Alright, that's it for this video. I hope that was helpful. Bye everybody.